You're standing on Main Street in the heart of your small town, holding a vibrant rainbow flag, knowing that every single person in your community could be watching and forming assumptions about you. Do you step forward? That is the kind of courage I experienced at Two Spirit lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer rural pride events across Canada in 2024. Hundreds of people stepped forward, knowing the risks, expecting the whispers, and ready to face pushback. That is where I learned that sometimes courage emerges through discomfort. Rural prides are more than celebrations. They are about building a human connection that uplifts one another. They reveal how fear can either isolate and suppress us or unite us. We can discover the power of community through rural prides. Over the past decade, there has been an insurgence of rural pride events across Canada, despite growing hostility toward queer and trans people. Although urban prides demand rights through loud and visible protests, rural prides exist in a different context. They are emerging at a time when queer and trans rights have advanced in Canada, and there is greater understanding into sexual and gender diversity. However, queer and trans visibility in rural areas remains risky, casting these rural prides as important life-saving spaces. When I was 16 years old, one day I'm sitting in my town park of Exeter, Ontario, terrified to be myself. There were not that many people in the park that day, which was perfect for me. The bullying at school was relentless and overwhelming. I just needed a moment of stillness and a break from the fear. I wore a fluorescent jacket that was as bright as a lighthouse. I thought I was being trendy. A young mother noticed me from the distance. I mean, how could she not? It was a pretty bright jacket. She sent a note telling me to where I can find help if I needed it. That simple act of kindness was a lifeline. And a rural pride event is another kind of lifeline for everyone. And so as I traveled across Canada, I asked myself, what could rural prides teach us? And I learned 3 lessons that illustrate how courage emerges through discomfort. First, rural prides teach us to feel brave in vulnerability. When we think of bravery, we think of being loud and charging into the unknown. That kind of bravery is important. But bravery can also be just as powerful when expressed through presence and calmness. Bravery is the decision to create community when none existed before. In Sioux Lookout, Ontario, a rainbow bench sits by Pelican Lake, a simple bench in northern Canada that's an inclusive space for everyone, including the pelicans. Sioux Lookout's Pride event consisted of a march through downtown, spaces for learning, and a community meal. Claiming public space takes an uncomfortable courage, and I witnessed that courage elsewhere along my travels. Rainbows woven into crosswalks, storefronts, and parks. Drag performers at Royal Canadian Legions, where drag queens and Queen Elizabeth share the same stage. Queer yoga and queer proms at senior centers. Two spirit people sharing their sacred stories. Marches through the town streets, reminding us that trans and queer people are under threat. Second, Rural pride events teach us to humanize difference. Our backgrounds form a human library, and we're all contributing to one another's stories. Drag Queen Story Hours, for example, they light up everyone's literacy and imagination. Drag queens read books to children, sing songs with them, and teach them the best dance moves. At Huron County Pride in Goderich, Ontario, a young gay man helped organize a rural pride event. He said, rural families should be proud of their children, regardless of their sexuality. That is a message every queer kid growing up in a small town needs to hear. At Musquodoboit Harbour, Nova Scotia, residents organized a queer film night under a starry sky by an old railway car. They also organized a queer kayaking trip. Now, what makes a kayak queer? Queer and trans people do. These moments remind us queer and trans people are part of the rural fabric. They embrace the same generosity, warmth, and kindness that define these communities. Third, rural prides teach us to defy silence. When we share our diverse voices, our communities become even more incredible and vibrant. In Fernie, British Columbia, families organized a pride bike ride to reimagine their town through a lens of inclusion. In Musquodoboit Harbour, children created miniature pride floats in the public library, sparking intergenerational conversations. In Brandon, Manitoba, drag performers facilitated drag bingo despite a tornado warning. The tornado and the performers brought a flurry of activity. When defying silence, joy appears in unlikely places. Bingo. These 3 lessons remind us, and they teach me that courage emerges through discomfort. To be visible is to be vulnerable. But to step forward, that is courage. And rural prides can inspire those who are not yet ready to step out. They can transform communities. They can build a sense of belonging. And just like my trendy teenage fluorescent jacket, they invite hope, education, and support. Back at Huron County Pride, I sat listening to the mayor of my hometown, Exeter, speak. I recognized him instantly. He was one of the few adults who showed me kindness when I was a teenager. He was calling for more queer and trans leaders of rural communities. After his presentation, I approached him to see if he remembered me. It took a moment and a few hints. I'm not that famous yet. But then he did. He smiled and said, I'm so proud of who you've become. And our town should be proud that you came from here. That's what's possible. That's what's happening in these small towns across Canada and elsewhere where rural prides exist. When leaders move past their own fear and support queer and trans people, they help their communities thrive. And how could they help? They can sponsor events, recruit volunteers, show kindness, and keep the conversation going year-round. The impact then multiplies. And we can all join rural prides. We can dance at queer proms, support queer and trans youth, foster respect and understanding, and march through the streets. And maybe, just maybe, you can take some of that courage with you in your own lives. If you're ever feeling stuck, uncertain, or alone, Take inspiration from those who organize rural pride events. They push forward despite the resistance, limited resources, and fear of violence. They are living proof that it is okay to feel uncomfortable and scared when you're going against that grain, because that's the edge where courage begins. So I leave you with my initial scenario for contemplation. You're standing in the heart of your hometown, holding a bright rainbow flag. Will you step forward?